Hi guys, my name is Ben Guilford. I'm the owner of the Firebrick Company, and in this video we're going to show you how to lay the tiles that make up the floor of your wood-fired brick oven kit.
The first thing that we need to do is we need to transfer the centre lines from our slab onto our subfloor castable heat bank. That centre line is actually going to help us lay the floor tiles because we're going to orient the floor tiles using that centre line. Bring it up from the slab. It doesn't have to be millimetre perfect. It doesn't really matter too much. Obviously you don't want it to be miles off, but you know, just do your best. And then we're going to use a straight edge to draw the line between the two points. So some tools that you're going to want for the process: you're going to need a level, nice, preferably a longish one, just so that you can use it firstly to set your level for your very first tile, but then you'll also use it as a straight edge to make sure that neighbouring tiles in line with the first one. You're going to want a trowel, you'll want a rubber mallet or a dead blow mallet. Dead blows are fantastic. Please, when you're putting your tiles down, don't use a normal hammer because you could imagine, you're whacking our Firebrick tiles with a hammer. You could actually split them in half if you tried hard enough. So dead blow mallet is the way to go. And then these, while they're a safety thing, of course, these are actually a tool as well. We're going to be wearing these rubber gloves so that we can notch the mortar mixture with our fingers. So rather than trying to use, say, a notched trowel where you spread out some mortar and then you get one of those sort of toothed trowels to notch the mortar, we're not going to do that. We're going to notch it with our fingers. This is not really like laying porcelain tiles in your bathroom or your kitchen. It's quite a different process. It's much closer to bricklaying than it is to tiling. So we won't be using a notch trowel. We'll be using our hands. One of the most important pieces of safety equipment that you're going to be using while you're building your wood-fired oven kit is actually a pair of rubber gloves. I've got these from my local supermarket. This is a pair of heavy-duty washing up gloves. They're absolutely fantastic. And the reason we need these is because we are handling mortar, we're handling refractory castable, and those things are quite alkaline and can actually cause chemical burns if we let them. Now, the reason we wear rubber gloves as opposed to, say, gardening gloves is, well, they keep the water out, because while it's very important that we don't touch the mortar, we really don't want to touch that with our hands, it's equally important to keep our hands dry. And this is something I learned the hard way. I was wearing a pair of the rubber gloves and building one of my ovens, and I got some burns and some sores on my hands anyway. I was like, well, what's going on? I've done the right things. I've taken the precautions. I've worn the gloves. But what I hadn't noticed was water had gotten into the gloves while I was doing the build. And so I was working for hours on end with wet hands. And I don't know if you've looked at your hands in the bath and they've gotten all pruny and soft. And when your skin gets soaking wet, it gets very, very soft. And then let's say you have a little bit of grit in your gloves. Well, that grit will rub, and it can effectively give you a sore because your skin, particularly if you have delicate engineer's hands like these bad boys, it can give you sores. So the key here is have two pairs of rubber gloves. And so if you do find you get a bit of water into one of them, hey, take it off, turn it inside out so that it can dry your hand off, get another glove and keep going. But just keep that in mind. Keep your hands as dry as you can so that the skin is nice and strong and resistant to any cement or anything that you're touching. The refractory mortar, the refractory castable, these things are not powerful alkalis, but the combination of wet, soft skin and the slight alkalinity of those materials is not a good one. So please, guys, make sure, take care of your skin, take care of your hands, get a couple of good quality pairs of rubber gloves and keep your hands nice and dry. Guys, we're going to be using a hybrid refractory mortar mixture to bed the floor tiles down.
The mix you're going to need is the Airset refractory mortar. You'll find it's clearly labelled Airset mortar. And this is the material that you're going to be using to bed down your floor tiles. Now, this is part of a hybrid mixture. We get you to mix the airset with Portland cement, washed sand, and hydrated lime. And the idea there is to make a nice thick mix that sets rock hard, but it's also a mix that goes quite a long way. The mixture under the floor is not really to stick the tiles together or anything like that. It's just to provide a leveling surface that sets hard once it cures. So we know our airset mortar needs to be mixed with Portland cement, hydrated lime, and washed sand in order to make the hybrid mixture. But what we wanted to do was go into a little bit more detail on those materials because we have had a few customers get confused. The word cement means so many things. You could have, super glue is a form of cement, or you have a pre-mixed bag of concrete people think of as being cement. Portland cement is a very specific name, and it refers to a fine powder that is the active ingredient in concrete. It doesn't have any sand, it doesn't have any stone mixed into it, it's pure cement. So if you're going to your hardware store, if you ask for Portland cement, you're going to get the right thing. You don't want anything that's got something mixed into it like sand or aggregate. It's just cement by itself. Okay, the next thing is hydrated lime. And hydrated lime is also called slaked lime or builder's lime. And it's designed for mixing mortar. It gives the mortar more plasticity. And it's also fantastic for making our perlite render later on in the process. And so hydrated lime can be a little bit tricky to find depending where you are. In Australia, you walk into pretty well any hardware store and it's right there and it's cheap and it's just there and just get it and put it in the car. In America, it's a little bit more challenging. We're not sure why. Maybe people bury bodies with it or something. I don't know. I'm not sure why it's so hard to get, but you do not want lime that would be used in your garden. Okay, that's another form of lime. It's a very different material. You don't want a lime that you squeeze. No, it's a white powder. It's a fine white powder. And yeah, hydrated lime is what you're after there. The last thing you need for your hybrid mortar mix is washed sand. And a good question that we get quite a lot is, oh, there's so many types of washed sand out there. Which one should I get? It doesn't matter. Any washed sand will do just fine, as long as it is sand and not a mixture of sand and gravel. My dad brought some washed sand home once to make his oven, and I was looking, I'm like, where did you find this? It had chunks of stones in it. You don't want that, because that'll get in the way of bedding your floor tiles down. That big aggregate will be quite frustrating. So you want well-graded, washed sand. Just make sure you don't buy bricky sand, or anything that has a clay mixed through it. So bricky sand is typically orange or yellow color. So make sure you get some washed sand. It can be playground sand, gap sand, paving sand. There's a whole heap of different types. As long as it's washed sand, it'll do just fine.
Now you're going to find all the details for that mixture in the written instructions that complement these video instructions. Like I say in most of these videos, we really need you to read the written instructions as well as watching these videos, because there's information in the written instructions that's not in these videos, and vice versa. So we really need you to use both. So to find out the mixture that you're going to be using to bed the floor tiles down, have a read of the written instructions that you'll find on our website. The link's in the description. Got our floor tiles all set out behind me here, ready to lay. And I just want to take the opportunity to point out a couple of things. Now, we ship these ovens all over the world. They're made in Melbourne, Australia, and we ship them as far to Costa Rica and USA and Europe and all over the world. And we do our level best to make sure that every single brick gets to you in perfect condition. But this is 1 metric ton of masonry that we're trying to move over thousands of kilometers, and occasionally we do find that you can get just little chips off the corners of bricks, particularly the tiles. We do find that sometimes we might lose just a little corner of a tile in transit. We check them when we pack them. We don't give you broken bricks, but occasionally we do find that we get some little chips along the way. If you do find a tile that has a chipped corner, often it's very easy just to flip it upside down so that that particular tile ends up with the chip facing down and the nice side facing up. All right. You can also think about where the tiles are going to end up. If you have a look at the layout in the written instructions for the oven, you'll find that quite a few of the corners and edges of the tiles end up being covered by other bricks, and you'll never ever see them again. So if you do find that you've got a little bit of damage, you can easily compensate for that by using those bricks in places where those particular edges or corners are never going to be seen again. Now, when I say this, please understand, if you do find you've got a real, some severe damage, which is very rare, but it can happen, just let us know and we'll sort it out for you. Fire bricks are very porous. In fact, even as dense and heavy as they are, you're going to find that when you put them into water, they'll actually bubble as the porosity in the brick absorbs that water. So what we're going to be doing is soaking the bricks in tubs of water for about 5 minutes. We can leave them in there as long as we want, but they need a good 5 minutes to soak through. We're going to soak the tiles first before we lay them, because the hybrid mortar mix that we use for bedding the floor tiles down can be dehydrated by these bricks. If we just put it straight onto the brick, it will dry the mortar out almost instantly and it won't bond very well to it. So we want to wet these tiles down nice and thoroughly by soaking them in water before we lay them. Now, I'm not going to talk about the particular layout of the tiles because these videos are designed to help you build any of our brick oven kits. So what we need you to do is refer to the written instructions for the particular layout for your oven that you're building. Okay, so a lot of the ovens do share sort of similar tile components, but each one has its own specific layout. So we really need you to have a read of those written instructions. What you're going to find for our bigger commercial ovens, the D130 and above, we tend to cut the floor tiles so that the dome of the oven is actually coming down onto our heat bank around the floor tiles rather than landing on top of the floor tiles themselves. And the primary reason for this is in a commercial oven, you might one day wear out some of the floor tiles. And they may need to be replaced in 10 years' time. And so we build the dome around the floor for the commercial ovens so that it makes it easy to replace the tiles should that ever be necessary. In a domestic application, you will never wear out these tiles. These things are tough as nails. It takes years and years in a commercial environment of constant use to ever even start wearing them. So in a domestic setting, so the D105, the D95, we're not worried about wearing those floor tiles down at all. It's just for the bigger commercial ovens that we change that floor tile layout so that they can be replaced easily if it should ever be necessary. So mixed up a batch of mortar here. Now guys, you don't have to mix the entire amount at once. I just mix about a half a bucket at a time. And then once I've used all of that up, I'll mix up some more. So you're aiming for a nice thick mix, not too dry, but not a sloppy, wet soup either. somewhere in between. The general guide is if you get some on a trowel, you should be able to hold it upside down and it won't fall off, okay? So that's a nice mix. You can see it's quite soft, so it's going to be nice and easy to bed our tiles down, but it's not runny. All right, so before we start using this and bedding our tiles down, we're going to saturate the castable with water. So I'm just going to use the hose and just get a bit of water onto that castable layer because that's porous as well. And we don't want that castable layer to dry out the mortar either. Okay, so wet the castable down. If you've got water, sort of ponded on that surface, just give that a little wipe with a sponge just to remove any real excess. We're not wanting, a swamp. We just want a little bit of moisture on that surface so that our mortar doesn't dry out straight away. Now, laying our floor tiles, we're going to start at the front. Remember, check your written instructions for the layout for your particular oven. For the D105 that we're building here, we're going to start off with this big triangular tile at the very front. So we're going to put this on our castable slab. We're going to line it up on that center line, and we're going to use the front edge here of the calcium silicate board to act as the other guide. Okay, now this is a really good example actually. My castable layer is a bit wavy because that plastic edging isn't, razor straight. So you might want to get a set square and use it to actually give yourself a line to follow at the front, using your center line as the middle, a line across here. Do the same thing here. Let's continue this across. Now, before you ask how far back can you go, there's actually quite a lot of allowance in the size of this layer compared to the size of the floor tiles. There's actually nearly an inch all the way around the dome, the circular portion of the oven that's sort of extra. So you can, I would really recommend having your floor tiles as close to the front edge as you can get them, but don't stress if you have to move them back 10 or 20 mil. It won't be the end of the world. Okay, so we want to place our first tile, but it's quite important that we get that first tile on the right angle. Now, our particular slab here is basically dead level this way, but if I go front to back, it's slightly higher at the front than it is at the back. To give you an example, let's say the back was actually significantly higher than the front. So, this is an exaggeration, but if we laid our first tile dead flat, dead level, and the back of this slab was higher, as we move further back, we might start off with 10 millimeters of mortar underneath this tile, but as we get towards the back, we're going to run out. We're going to get to basically nothing. So what you need to do is basically just mimic the levels that you have. So for this piece here, I'm going to be going dead level left to right, and then front to back, for me, I'm going to get the bubble to basically just touch the inside line because that's what it's doing for the whole slab. I hope that makes sense to you. Basically, I want these floor tiles to be level with this surface. So we're going to start laying our tiles now, and guys, just lay one tile at a time. Don't apply mortar to the whole surface because it'll sort of start to dry out before you get to it. Just do one at a time. Once you've got that one set, mortar the next area and tackle that one. We're going to notch this mortar just using our fingers. Okay, and so that's actually going to give somewhere for the mortar to spread out in when we place this tile. Now again, make sure you pick your best side facing up. So I've got a little chip on this corner, so I'm going to put that down because later on I'll never see that again. first tile down, and it's to the levels that we were aiming for. So now we're going to start laying the tiles around, and we're just going to work from the front to the back. So guys, don't panic too much if you find that you just can't get them all completely flush with each other, because the process at the very end, once the floor tiles are all laid and set, is we're going to grind down any little high spots, any little edges that are maybe sitting up a little bit high. We're just going to grind that edge down so that it doesn't interfere with your pizza peel later on. Another tip, lay your tiles on a fairly thick bed of mortar, even up to maybe 8 millimeters thick, even 10 millimeters thick. You're going to find it's a lot easier to move the tiles around when you have a nice thick bed to push them into. But if you've only got a very thin bed to start with, you're going to find it quite challenging to get the tiles sitting how you want them. One tip, and this I learned the hard way, is remove the mortar that's right on this tile, so that when your next tile comes in, it doesn't try and squish mortar in between the two tiles. It means that you can get them nice and snug together. Just be careful to make sure that, particularly as you lay these first few front tiles, that you don't move this one around. So just come back and check that you haven't shifted it left or right and it's still following that line along the front. Because if we do and you manage to move this one, well then all of the other floor tiles might be put a little bit off center. Again, not the end of the world, but if you've got the opportunity to get it right at the start and just keep it on that line, then you'll find that your oven is facing exactly the way you want it to. So we're aiming to get our joints as tight as we can, but you will find that you usually get a joint of about 1 mil, maybe 2 millimeters or so, and that's absolutely fine. They don't have to be like completely hard against each other. You can have a little gap there, and later on, if you want, you can fill that gap in with some of your mortar. You don't really need to be honest. It doesn't add any strength or anything like that, and eventually that little gap, or any little gap that you find in your floor, is going to fill with ash anyway. Guys, one of the things that I love the most about building brick ovens is that it's actually a really forgiving process. So let's say you lay a floor tile and you're not really happy with it. It's sitting a bit low, you can't knock it down, or maybe you can't knock it down far enough. You're like, oh, you know, do you leave it like that? Well, you don't have to. It's very easy just to remove them. So you just winkle them up, and you can remove the old mortar that was there, and if it hasn't dried out too much, just pop that back in the tub, mix it through it, and lay it again. And so you can, it's one of those great processes where there's really not too many moments where you can really stuff it up really badly. It's really forgiving. So take your time, enjoy the process, and just get your floor tiles as neat and tidy as you can. Alright, so as I've laid this tile here, which is following along a center line, I've actually noticed that I am drifting, I'm about 5 mil to the right of the center line now. So when I set up my first one on the front, there's a good chance that as I was laying the other ones, I might have just pivoted it just a little bit. But fear not, because all of this mortar is still a little bit wet. We can actually move the tiles around just using our dead blow mallet. We can tap them around, and I can actually just twist these just a tiny bit to get them back on center. Once I'm past this point, I probably won't try and do that again because there'll be too many tiles to move. But given that we've only laid a few tiles here, I have the opportunity to just give it a little scooch back around and get it dead on center again. Brick oven kits, there is one particularly special tile, and it actually looks very similar to the standard square ones, with one particular difference. It has a very small hole drilled in the middle. We drill that here at our factory, and that's where the Trammel tool is going to lock in to pivot from the center of the floor and lay the dome bricks for you. So we want to make sure we put this in the right spot. You will see it's marked with a C on the sides so that you can identify it. So just make sure when you're setting out your floor tiles, when you're unpacking all your bricks, put this one to one side because you don't want to accidentally get it mixed up with the others. Floor tiles are all laid, which is fantastic. So just again, a couple of tips. You may find sometimes you're like, oh, I'm trying to get this thing level, but I've got it level, but you know, one side is sitting up a little high. And I just, no matter what I do, I can't seem to get it to match all of the other bricks perfectly. Please don't worry too much because sometimes these bricks are actually got a tiny, tiny little concavity in them. These are fired to extreme temperatures. They're fired to over 1350 degrees Celsius for 4 days in a big tunnel kiln when they're made. And so we do find that sometimes we just get a tiny, tiny bit of cupping in them. And so that can make it a little bit challenging when you're trying to get them all dead flat. But if you have a look at this, they're pretty good. And now I do have a, you know, like this here, I've probably got about a 0.5 millimeter high at the front. Don't worry too much if you have an overlap. Say this one here, this brick is a tiny bit higher here than this one. That's not an issue because if I'm using a pizza peel, it will slide straight over that. It's more about high points that are this way. So if I've got, for example, if this is a bit higher here, when I slide my pizza peel over this, it might grab on that surface. So before we start building the dome, we're going to just knock these high spots down using an angle grinder. I use a flap disc on the angle grinder, just a sanding disc. You could use a grinding disc if you want to. It doesn't need to be a crazy diamond grinding disc or anything like that because we're not trying to take off very much material at all. In fact, I'll deliberately just grind only the areas that absolutely need it, and I'm going to leave the rest of it as it is. Once you've laid your floor tiles, you need to allow them to set before you start building the dome. Now, if you want to be conservative, I recommend waiting for 12 hours. So let the tiles set overnight, and then you know that when you come back and start building on top of them, that they're set rock hard and they're not going to move around or dislodge on you. If you're in a real hurry, right? Maybe you might be building this for a customer. Maybe you're a landscaper or a stonemason and you're assembling this and you've got to get it done. Then technically you can get onto it earlier, but just be very careful that you don't dislodge any of the floor tiles as you're laying the bricks, because if I was say to tap this brick here sideways, I could break the bond that it currently has with the castable layer, and I don't want to do that. But again, if you're really careful, then you can attack it a little bit earlier. I would let it sit for minimum 2 hours before you start moving on with the rest of the process. But if you have the time, if you're not in a particular rush, this is a nice point to sit back with a cup of tea or a beer and admire your handiwork before you move on to the next step. Remember, this thing's going to be here for like 30 years or more. You know, this is going to be there for a very long time. So there's no great rush in getting it done. Consider it a project that you can just relax and enjoy.